I was sure the quiet would swallow me that evening, until my neighbor, Willie, stepped closer on the porch. What started as a small conversation in the cool dusk turned into the gentlest turning point of my life. I didn't see it coming, but I felt it, like a door opening inside my chest. And yes, it changed me. Before I begin, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? I'd love knowing where you're listening. Chicago, Dallas, Miami, a small town in Ohio. Say hi and drop your city below. My name is Marilyn. I'm 44, and I live on the second floor of a modest brown brick building with the kind of porch that collects every season like it's an old friend. Cottonwood fluff in spring, heat and laughter in summer, the crisp smell of leaves and cinnamon in fall, and in winter, the quiet I used to mistake for loneliness. That evening, the sky was still a shade of blue you only get right before night really decides to be night. A line of streetlights blinked on as if pulled by a single string, and the air smelled faintly of rain, even though the forecast had promised us dry skies. I'd set my glass of iced tea on the rail, felt the sweat bead and slide down, and listened to the neighborhood talk to itself. Distant tires on asphalt, a dog scolding a squirrel, someone closing a car door gently, like they were tucking a child into bed. I was thinking about the day, about my own quiet, when I heard his footsteps. Not the hurried kind, not the apologetic kind. Measured, steady, familiar. Willie has been my neighbor for years, a face I waved to when tossing out the trash, a voice I heard on mornings when we both left early, him with his thermos and that steady nod, me with my overpacked tote and a mental list that never got shorter. We'd had those small slice conversations people have when life moves fast. How's the coffee shop doing? Did the laundromat fix their broken machines? Is the pumpkin bread at the corner bakery still as good as last fall? But never anything that felt like a page turned, just a bookmark tucked in. Evening, he said, standing at the bottom of the 3 wide steps to my porch. The porch light I'd been meaning to change flickered once, then held steady, casting a warm halo that made the whole world look softer. He had that worn denim jacket on, the one that keeps its shape even when there's a summer breeze, and he held a folded newspaper under his arm like an old habit he couldn't break. He smiled, honest, a little surprised to find me sitting out there alone, and lifted the paper. They left this by my door, but it's got your apartment number. I laughed, small and grateful. I wondered where that went. Come on up. He paused, just a moment, a kind of polite hesitation I've come to recognize as his way of taking care without making a fuss. You sure I'm not interrupting? You're not, I said, and I meant it. He climbed the steps, and the porch took his weight with a soft creak that I'd grown fond of over the years. He handed me the newspaper, and our fingers brushed in a way that didn't mean much, but didn't mean nothing either. He sat on the top step instead of the chair, like he didn't want to presume, elbows on knees, looking out at the street as if it might offer him a thought worth keeping. The sky tucked a last ribbon of coral into the trees, and then let it go. You ever notice, he said, how this block gets quiet the way a person finally does after they've told you everything they can for the day? I smiled. I notice it every night. We talked in the easy, zigzag way people talk when they don't have an agenda. Work, and how he'd been helping his sister repaint the front of her little house across town. The evenings and how they come earlier than you think, suddenly like someone reached up and pulled the shade. He told me about a short drive he and his friend took along the river road, how the water had caught the light and held it like a secret. I told him my car needed a new wiper blade, and we both laughed at how grown-up we sounded, like we were trading recipes for being responsible. The thing I remember most is the feeling of being seen without being examined. He didn't pry, he just noticed that my tea was mostly melted ice now, that my porch light flickered, but somehow it suited me. That the way I held my shoulders meant I'd had a long day and was trying not to make it anyone else's problem. He noticed it, but he didn't try to fix it. He just sat with it, and with me. When the first cricket announced itself, loud and certain, I felt a thin thread of nervousness unspool inside me. I had been so used to my own company that another person's closeness felt like a tune I'd forgotten I knew. Willie glanced over, just a flick, then back to the street. I saw the side of his face, the even line of his jaw, the way the porch light caught on the tiniest flecks of gray in his hair. Men can try too hard, fill the quiet with swagger, but he never did. He let the quiet be. He seemed to think the quiet belonged to both of us. "You all right there, Marilyn?" He asked after a while, same gentle tone you'd use asking someone if the draft was too much and should you close the window. "I'm all right," I said, "just listening." "To what?" "To how the night gets kind when you let it." He nodded like that made perfect sense, which, to him, I think it did. He reached for the rail above his shoulder and gave it a test shake like he couldn't help himself, like he'd fix the whole world if it only came with a small bag of screws and enough daylight. "If you want, I can change that porch bulb tomorrow. Got a couple spares at my place." I looked at the light, at the tiny tremor that wasn't quite a flicker anymore. "I might like that," I said, "if you don't mind. Wouldn't offer if I did." The wind shifted and brought with it the smell of cut grass from half a block away. I felt that familiar impulse, the one where you straighten your skirt, though it doesn't need straightening, tuck your hair behind your ear, though it's already out of your face. Things you do because nerve endings make their own decisions. I asked him about the jacket, where he got it, and he told me a story about a roadside thrift store where the owner remembered every customer's name and the music never played louder than voices. He said that's how he liked it. Conversation first. Always conversation first. The porch steps aren't wide. If you sit where he sat, and I sit where I sat, your knees are not quite near, but not far either. He didn't reach for me, not once. He didn't lean in with a plan. He just found the spaces where my words lived and made room for them. I told him about the ache of starting over, about waking one morning and realizing you are a different person, and it's not a tragedy. It's just a new kind of ordinary. He nodded, and his eyes softened around the edges. He said he understood, and I believed him. When he finally stood, it wasn't because he was done. It was because the night had changed hands, and he was the sort of man who knows when to leave a moment intact. He brushed his palms on his jeans, and without moving closer, he asked, "May I sit up here with you again tomorrow? I mean, if tomorrow feels like this." The first surprise, small but bright, was how much my answer mattered to me. The second was how easy it was to say yes. "I'd like that," I said. He smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't need teeth to be full. Then he paused, and I saw him choose a thing carefully. "May I ask you something else?" "You can ask me anything," I said, and I meant that too. "If it's okay with you," he said, and he really did say it like that. "If it's okay with you, may I sit a little closer next time? Not to crowd you, just so I can hear you without the neighborhood listening in. I should tell you what happened in my body, how the air tightened around the place where my collarbone meets my throat, how I felt as if someone had turned the page and I could finally read the line I'd been waiting for. But I won't use fancy words, because the truth is simpler. It felt safe. It felt like I'd been offered a chair at a table where I'd been hovering in the doorway for years. "Yes," I said. "Closer would be okay." He didn't test his luck, didn't inch toward me as if to prove a point. He nodded, like consent was not a box to check, but a promise to keep. He took a step down, then another, and turned at the sidewalk. "Good night, Marilyn." "Good night, Willie." I listened to his footsteps fade until the street took them, and then I sat in the soft rumble of the neighborhood settling down. I could have gone inside right then, turned off the porch light, and let the evening be a neat little scene with a polite ending bow. But I stayed. I stayed because the porch light had stopped flickering as if it, too, had heard what we said and chosen steadiness. I stayed because the air was a cool hand on my forehead. I stayed because sometimes the long way home is the front step you've been avoiding for no good reason. The next morning, I half expected the feeling to have folded itself back up, delicate and far away like the newspaper he'd returned to me. Instead, it was there in the bright light of day, a quiet yes still humming in my ribcage. I went about my routines, coffee, dishes, the small domestic choreography that makes a life, only now there was a soundtrack I hadn't noticed before. The kettle sounded like anticipation. The window latch felt like possibility. Even the plant I always forget to water looked like it might forgive me. It's not that Willie had become the center of my thoughts. It's that he'd moved a chair in, pulled it up to the table, and said, "I'll keep you company while you figure out what's next." When evening came again, the sky performed the same soft magic. I sat on the porch and pretended to read while my eyes tried not to count every passing minute. He arrived not as a surprise, but as something hoped for and respected. The sound of his jacket sleeve brushing the railing, the warm hint of cedar soap, the slow, careful step as he approached like he was entering a church without a service, just the echo of the place to keep him honest. "Hey there," he said. "Brought a spare bulb. That all right?" "More than all right." He changed the bulb with practical grace, narrating each move in a way that made me feel included rather than instructed. "Lefty-loosey, righty-tighty, my granddad used to say," he murmured, and I liked the way the mention of a granddad could turn a porch into a kitchen table in a different time. When he was done, he looked at me, and I remembered what he'd asked the night before. "May I?" he asked, and he didn't have to finish the sentence. "Please," I said. He sat beside me, not touching, but close enough that the space between us felt like an invitation instead of a barrier. The street story continued. A pair of teens laughing into their phones, a woman tugging her dog away from a bush that must have smelled irresistible, an old pickup rolling by with the windows down and a melody that might have been Motown, or maybe it was just memory singing at the edges. "Tell me about your favorite place," he said. "Not the place you think you should say. The one you actually love." I told him about a tiny museum in a tiny town where the polished floors glowed like honey and the guide spoke softly, as if the paintings were napping. I told him how I'd gone alone once and sat on a wooden bench, and how it felt like a secret I'd earned. He listened with that unhurried attention that makes your words better just for being heard. "And yours?" I asked. He talked about a pier where the boards groaned under the weight of stories, where fishermen told jokes they'd been telling for 30 years and still laughed like it was the first time. He said he liked the end of the pier most, where the rails give way to nothing and you can see the line where water pretends to touch sky. He said sometimes he stands there and promises himself he'll try again at the things he hasn't gotten right yet. I looked at his hands as he spoke, capable hands, with a few nicks and a smear of paint at the cuticle that wouldn't come out, and I felt something inside me rearrange itself in a way that made more sense than before. It was then, quietly without fanfare, that he turned his palm up between us halfway, not a request so much as a possibility. He didn't look at me, didn't guide me. He simply offered the idea that my hand might belong there if I wanted it to. The decision felt like the most important small event of my year. I didn't rush. I set my glass on the rail, listened to the condensation make that soft kiss on wood, and then I placed my hand in his. We didn't grip. We rested. There is a difference. "You okay?" he asked, voice low enough that the night kept it secret. I am, I said. Are you? I am. The porch light, newly strong, cast a steady circle around us. Within it, I could see what we were doing. Not starting something reckless, not promising more than either of us had to give, but granting a second life to the part of ourselves that wanted stillness with company. My heart was not pounding. It was untying itself. My shoulders were not tense. They were the kind that remember how to drop. His thumb didn't slide across my knuckles. He didn't pull me closer without asking. He just held my hand like he knew that sometimes the bravest thing isn't a kiss at all. It's the shared decision to wait and see. We let the minutes collect. A moth tested the new bulb, decided it was too hot, and drifted off to bother the streetlight instead. Somewhere a screen door thumped, and someone laughed in the private way of a family, telling a story they've told 100 times. Every now and then, one of us would say something. Small things, true things. That cloud looks like a ship. Do you hear the train that far off? I like the way your name sounds at night. And then we would return to the kind of quiet that nourishes rather than starves. He walked me to my door, not because I needed walking, but because endings should be treated with the same attention as beginnings. At the threshold, he let go of my hand and put his own in his jacket pocket, and I could tell he did it to remind himself that patience is a kind of respect. Marilyn, he said, thank you for tonight. Thank you for asking, I said. May I do one more very neighborly thing? He asked, and he gave the word neighborly a warmth I hadn't heard in a long time. You may. May I promise to take this slow with you, even if I'm excited not to? I smiled, and it felt like forgiveness for him, for me, for the hours I'd spent convincing myself I was safer alone. I would like that. He touched the brim of a hat he wasn't wearing, some old-fashioned manner slipping through, and took a step back. Good night, Marilyn. Good night, Willie. After I closed the door, I leaned my back against it and listened to the quiet inside my apartment. It wasn't the kind that pressed. It was the kind that made space. I went to the kitchen for a glass of water and caught my reflection in the dark window. The same woman, but not quite. Softer around the edges. More herself. Changed, yes, but not into somebody new. Into somebody I remembered being, once, before the noise of the world convinced me the good parts were gone. I slept like summer rain, steady and generous. The next morning, when the sun made lace out of my curtains, I found a small, folded note slid under the door, written in careful block letters. If you like coffee with your porch, I make a good second cup. I smiled because it was both invitation and restraint, both door and door frame. I pressed the paper to my chest, feeling the low hum of yes that had started on those steps. I poured myself a coffee and returned to the porch where the new bulb glowed faint as a pearl in daylight. The street was just starting its day, school bus sighing, a jogger waving, the bakery's exhaust carrying warm yeast and cinnamon into the morning. I sat and thought about how change rarely looks like fireworks. It usually looks like a man asking permission and meaning it, a woman saying yes and meaning it, two neighbors learning the language of patience in the steady light of a porch that doesn't flicker anymore. That's where we were, and that's where this begins. The second evening felt different before it even began. All through the day, I carried that folded note in my pocket, the one Willie had slipped under my door. I must have read it a dozen times, tracing the neat block letters with my thumb. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't poetic. It was simply thoughtful. And that thoughtfulness had a weight to it I hadn't realized I'd been craving. I cleaned the kitchen that morning more thoroughly than usual, wiping counters I normally would have left for later, setting the mugs in a neat row like I was preparing for company. In the afternoon, I went through the closet and pulled out a soft cardigan I hadn't worn in months. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I wanted to feel prepared, presentable, ready for the kind of attention that wasn't sharp or judging, but kind. As the sun dropped lower, I brewed a pot of coffee, letting the aroma fill my apartment until it smelled like warmth itself. I poured 2 cups, one for me and one for him, and carried them out to the porch. The sky was the color of faded lavender, and a gentle breeze moved through the trees like someone flipping through the pages of a book. I set the cups down and waited, my heart settling into a rhythm that was both nervous and strangely calm. Then came the sound I'd started to know by heart, his footsteps. Steady, unhurried, with that faint scuff at the end like he wasn't trying to arrive, but simply allowing himself to. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, his hands in the pockets of that same denim jacket. "Evening, Marilyn," he said, his voice low and steady. His eyes landed on the mugs. "I see you didn't forget." I smiled. "I wouldn't dare. Come on up before it gets cold." He climbed the steps and sat down beside me without hesitation this time. The porch boards groaned gently under his weight, a sound that had become oddly comforting. He picked up his cup, inhaled the steam, and let out a sigh. "Now this," he said, "this is what makes a day worth it." We fell into conversation easily, the way water finds its way down a slope. At first, we stayed close to familiar topics: the stubborn squirrel, the boy with the bike, the grocery store that had started stocking fresh peaches again. But slowly, like leaves drifting into a stream, deeper subjects floated in. He told me about his childhood summers spent fishing with his uncle on a lake, so still you could see the sky doubled on its surface. He described the way the mornings smelled of damp wood and gasoline from the little boat, how they would sit in silence for hours until one of them broke it with a story or a laugh. I listened, picturing it so clearly I could almost smell the lake myself. "It sounds peaceful," I said softly. "It was," he replied. "Peaceful but not lonely. There's a difference, isn't there?" I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. There's a world of difference. Then it was my turn. I told him about my grandmother's porch swing, the nights when I was young and believed the whole world was contained in the smell of honeysuckle and the sound of cicadas. I told him how safe I'd felt in that space, how sometimes I closed my eyes now and tried to remember that feeling, even when the years had put so much distance between me and those moments. He didn't just listen. He absorbed. His eyes softened, his expression carrying that rare gift of someone who isn't just hearing the words, but also the ache behind them. "You deserve to feel that safe again," he said. Not as a promise, but as a truth. I let the words settle. For years, I had carried my own quiet like armor. But sitting there, his hand resting gently near mine, I realized that maybe my quiet didn't need to be armor anymore. Maybe it could be a porch, wide open, welcoming someone in. When he reached for my hand, it was with the same patience as the night before. Not a grab, not a test, just a palm turned up, a possibility. And once again, I found myself placing my hand in his. This time, though, it wasn't tentative. It was steady, deliberate. My hand belonged there, and I let it stay. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of trust, of unspoken words, of a kind of relief I hadn't felt in years. The night around us hummed with small sounds, the whir of a passing car, the rustle of a dog's collar, the far-off train calling across town. But all I really heard was the steadiness of his breathing, the quiet confirmation that he was right there beside me. "Marilyn," he said after a while, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it, "I don't want to rush anything. I just want to be here. With you, however you'll let me." I turned to him, my heart open in a way that startled me. "Willie, I've spent so much time convincing myself that being alone was